The book of James is about true saving faith verified by righteous behavior. In the 15th chapter of John's Gospel, a familiar text about the vine and the branches, Jesus says in verse 8, "By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so you prove to be my disciples." It's plain and simple to figure that. A disciple is known by his fruit. No fruit, no saving faith. The book of James as a series of tests to measure our faith. As we meditate till verse 12 of chapter 1, we have the test of perseverance through trials. We will be looking at some key ways to endure through trials. It's a test, but he is also giving ways to strengthen faith that already exists. Firstly, a joyful attitude. Verse 2, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds." Well, what are these various kinds of trials? We know from verse 1, he's writing to believers who are dispersed or scattered. They must have been homeless, ostracized, poor, weak physically, stressed emotionally, without their friends and family at their new location. The very first thing he says to them after greeting in verse 1 is, "Count it all joy, my brothers." It's not partial joy, it's all joy. We find the word when in the verse. It's not the word if. When used in this form, it's in a sense saying whenever, and it's inevitable. The word count in the verse calls for a conscious commitment to a joyful attitude. In Philippians 4, Paul says, "I have learned in whatever state to be content." He says that just after he said, "Rejoice always," and again I say rejoice. So he learned to do that, and he said that while he was a prisoner. In Acts 16, Paul and Silas are in jail. They're not like some jails today. This would be a dirty and dark place with no sanitary conditions. And it says about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. This is a joyful attitude amid a very difficult trial. In 2 Corinthians 12, 8-9, when Paul was talking about a thorn in his flesh, he says, "3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" Thorn in the flesh must be a metaphor for a very difficult trial. Sometimes we don't need the elimination of the trial. We only need the grace to endure it. In the next verse he says, "I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Paul had a great reason to be free of pain, so he could serve the Lord more, do more ministry, reach more people. But God was concerned about Paul's character and wanted to keep him humble. We know that in our trials we are much more sensitive to God. When we are going through difficult times, our prayer life and communion with God increases. We search scriptures to find answers for our problems. We ask people to pray for us, and all of that draws us closer to the Lord, the very source of joy. So it's our privilege to have our faith tested and accept it with joy. So we rejoice amidst our trials as it draws us close to the Lord, and it allows us to have the privilege of the fellowship of His sufferings, and it keeps us humble as we are dependent on Him. So James says we start with a joyful attitude when we have trials. Have a blessed weekend.